Good evening, everyone. I hope you're well. I hope you had a good weekend. This week's provocation is based on the African American experience. Okay, so I came across this documentary called Finding Your Roots, which is like an American version of Who Do You Think You Are? And it features a selection of celebrities and famous people, and they trace their roots back. Now, last week, I was watching one that featured Pharrell Williams, and I just want to play a short video. It's not great quality because that's my phone pointing at the screen. Okay, so here we go. I want you to focus on what he says at the end.
That portion of the truth is whitewashed in a way to make it digestible for people to talk about in school during their academics. But no one really understands the gravity of this. I feel this because this is connected to my DNA. That's when you ask me how do I feel when I read this about my DNA, it makes me think about not only them and us, but it makes me think about the whole of this country. Because I love this country, but I just want this country to love us the same way.
Right, and to appreciate all that we've gone through.
Yes. It's like, how do you enslave children? Who are these people? That's my question. Like, who are these people? And who are these people? Who are the descendants of these people who don't know that the right thing to do is to bring some sense of repair, reparations?
If we could find the people who owned your ancestors, what would you do? I mean, would you want to meet them?
I would love to have a conversation. I can't ask you to atone for your ancestors' sins, but I could actually get into a conversation. And it's not about me trying to confront. It's just like, let's have the conversation. Because you know what? Here's what I do know in this country.
Here we go.
As African Americans, we need advocates.
Right.
We need allies.
Right. Across the color line.
100%.
Right.
But very.
So that's me. It's something that I've wrestled with and I find troublesome. You know, that I love African American music and culture, but am I just still exercising my own white privilege? And it's something that I keep asking myself. But it feels like Henry Louis Gates Jr. and Pharrell Williams have said, "We need you," and so I'm going to step up to the plate. So the outcomes for this video are that I hope that we will come to a greater appreciation of people so hated, yet have produced a culture that has uplifted and enriched the entire world. Outcome 2, in the struggle and pain, there is still hope and beauty. Outcome 3, I would like you to begin to see the sheer amount of knowledge and understanding and culture that exists in the world. And there are key terms. This is really high level stuff, so I don't expect all of you to understand all of this right now, but there's double consciousness, critical race theory, and intersectionality. We won't be doing historical relativism though. So here are two early figures in the 19th century. Harriet Tubman was famous for creating the Underground Railroad, and that was a system of networks and routes, safe houses, people that you could rely on that would help runaway slaves to get to the free north. Ain't I a Woman is a famous speech by Sojourner Truth that kind of started this process of looking at multiple levels of oppression. She was a woman, so that was one level of oppression, but of course she was also black, and that was the second one. This has a term, it's called intersectionality, and I'll do a little bit more on that in a bit. So, four sort of, I think, key thinkers, writers of the sort of late 19th and early 20th century. Frederick Douglass was a freed slave who wrote some amazing texts about the experience. I.G.B. Wells was crucial in the fight against lynchings. Booker T. Washington was a political figure, and most importantly, I think W.E.B. Du Bois was crucial in academicizing, I never say that word, the Black American experience. Okay, so one of the key things that happened in the 20th century was the Harlem Renaissance, which was like an uprising of creative arts in Harlem in New York. Two of the crucial ones for me are both Zora Neale Hurston and Langston Hughes. Again, now see, Langston Hughes was black, and most scholars seem to think he was also gay, so there's, again, an intersectionality, two levels of oppression. And of course, we can't really talk about the African American experience without mentioning Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and lesser known but just as important, Medgar Evers. And it's also worth noting that they all got assassinated. In literature, some of the three most, possibly the three most important women writers anyway, are Toni Morrison, Maya Angelou, and Alice Walker. Now, I hesitated to look at sport because sport is one of the areas which traditionally, stereotypically, black people have been allowed to excel in. However, I've chosen these three because they were all really important political figures in a way as well. I won't talk about Muhammad Ali because I think you all know about him, but Jesse Owens won multiple gold medals in the Berlin Olympics just before the Second World War, and humiliated Hitler. Hitler had this whole idea of the Aryan race, the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Uber race, the master race, and Jesse destroyed that idea, which was wonderful. And Tommy Smith and John Carlos with the Black Power salute in the 1968 Mexico Olympics. I remember that. I actually remember that, and I was only 6, and I didn't know as a 6-year-old, I didn't know what all the fuss was. James Baldwin, again, intersectional, both black and gay, to the point his life was, being black was just so bad for him that he decided to go to Paris because he just couldn't bear it any longer. He did return a few years later because he felt that he had to support his people, pay his dues as he calls it. And right up to date, so Neil deGrasse Tyson, I just wanted to include him in the fact that what's really important is that black people in the US and in the UK, by the way, contribute in every field and every area of society, not just the stereotypical one. So he's a scientist, this guy. And finally, in education, Cornel West and Bell Hooks. Bell Hooks has had a massive influence on my teaching. She's asked me who am I as a person, who am I teaching, what am I teaching it, and how am I teaching it. Her influence can't be stated higher. Okay, so we're going to look at music now. This is a bit trickier, so bear with me. So there was slavery in all the southern states of the US. So that was a massive belt, obviously in the South. But what I'm trying to say in this comment is that they responded in very similar ways. And how did they do that if they were so separated in time and distance? Well, one of the ways was, so first of all, let's know that slavery is a lot of awful things, but one of the worst things is not being free, okay? But in that lack of freedom, they had incredible ways of communicating, and I'll show you one of them. So on their Sundays, the slaves would sing their spirituals. They used to be called Negro spirituals, but Negroes are not a nice word now. But behind these spirituals were coded messages for the slaves that were about to run for their freedom and make their way to the north. And I'll give you an example. There's a song called Wade in the Water. Now, that could just be taken as in, like a baptism or some religious ceremony. But what it actually meant was those who were about to run, they were telling them to make your way, get into the water, get into rivers, because the master would chase after them and use dogs, and the dogs would obviously follow the scent. If you got in the water, that scent would be finished. So wade in the water. Here's a little snippet of the song.
Wade in the water, we did wade in the water, children, wade in the water, God said he's gonna jump in the water.
Wade in the water. Now, after slavery finished, African Americans were freer, obviously freer, to pursue their creative interests. And I'm going to look at a few of those now. So, after the end of slavery, there was what was called the Great Migration. And that was effectively many of the black people in the southern states made their way up to the northern states. It's called the Great Migration. 30 acres and a mule was one of the white America's promises that they would give to black people, which didn't come about. Reconstruction is that period after the slavery. But I want you to show you how influential African American culture has been on the world. And I'm going to show it through the blues note as an expression of Africa. So that's why I got my guitar. Now, sorry it's a bit technical. I hope you can follow this. So if you listen to these two notes, they're the same, but one's lower and one's higher, right? How we separate the notes, it's called a scale. You'll know it. So it's like, that's the major scale. It's 8 notes. That's the basis of all Western music, European music, from Bach to Beethoven to the Beatles. Now, that octave in other cultures, not so India, China, Japan, all the different, and obviously Africa, those 2 octaves was separated up with more notes, right? So not 8, could have been 12, 16, 18. So the gaps were narrower. Right, so slavery had finished, and what was available were, as you can see, guitars. They were cheap and portable, but still, hundreds of years after being ripped away from Africa, their African, I don't want to say soul, but the African mind was still was thinking back. Now, this is called a blues note. So what would happen is it would be pushed up. Ready? Okay? That is you listen to blues music, guitar music, rock music. That is kind of like one of the standard things. And it's basically the black soul trying to find the notes in between the European scale. Does that make sense? All right? Okay, and that's called the blues note. Right. The other side of the coin, as it were, was called gospel. Very slightly linked to the spirituals, but gospel was a religious music that black people sung in the churches. Okay, it's really important. This is early 20th century. Now, by the mid sort of post Second World War, they had been divided. Now the blues was called the devil's music. It was called the devil's music for whatever reason. There's a long history. I can't go into that, but it was called the devil's music. Maybe because it was blue, it was negative, it was, oh, woe is me, the world is awful, where gospel was uplifting. Whatever reason, devil's music and God's music. Okay? Now, post World War II, more and more people were heading to the cities, especially black people, heading to the cities. Also, instruments had become amplified, so they were louder, and they were playing in clubs rather than acoustic guitars wandering around the American states singing their blues songs. And that turned into a thing called rhythm and blues. Okay? Now, here's where it gets complicated. That then turned in the 1950s to rock and roll. Now, some people, especially, I believe, Quincy Jones, and I think also another one of Chuck Berry, some of the old black rhythm and blues musicians actually really hated Elvis Presley, because he initially, when he was heard on the radio, they thought he was black because he sung like a black man. But it's just another example of what April Baker Bell calls white America likes to take but loves to hate. Okay? They took black American music, turned it into rock and roll, and you might like to say the rest is history. Cultural appropriation. Black music sanitized for white ears. So, but eventually, I mentioned that gospel and blues were opposite sides of the spectrum. One was devil's music, one was godly. Sometime between the late 1950s and the early 60s, they combined. It became became another style of music. Now, most of these soul singers sung in the churches, okay? So that became soul music. As the 60s and 70s progressed, soul music turned into other styles of music like funk, disco, and that of course then moved into, in the 1980s, into what's called house music and garage, and obviously hip hop and urban and contemporary R&B, and actually every single musical style that we listen to today, other than perhaps country and western and classical, has its roots in African American music. All of them, bar none. Right, so one last thing about music. So if as a group of people you retain the trauma of slavery, the last thing you would want to do is create music that either sounds like the enslaved music, European classical music if you like, at that time, or that it has rules. You'd want to make music that was free, wouldn't you? By the way, the same rules can roughly apply to language, literature and art. And that is exactly what happened. Jazz music kind of partly it grew out of blues in some respects, okay? Can't go into it too much because we'll be here forever. And one of the key features of jazz is that it's improvised. And improvised means it's spontaneous. In other words, it's free. Okay? Okay, so I'm going to move on now to theory. Okay, sorry, I'll turn the guitar down so it doesn't make any noise. Theory. Now, this is obviously more academic, so bear with me. W.E.B. Du Bois came up with a term called double consciousness, and I'm white. I can't really put myself in this situation, so I will be very quick on this one. But what I think he means is, one of the famous quotes from his text is that one ever feels his two-ness, an American, a Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings. And I'll give you an example. So if you're Italian American or Irish American, as you walk down the street minding your own business, you are just American. You're white. There's no cultural markers as to your Irish or Italian heritage, unless you wear a shamrock or you're on St. Patrick's Day. That's not, that freedom, if you like, is not given to a black person in America. So there's always that American, but also black. I think that's all I can say on that topic. But it's been hugely influential, hugely. Critical race theory. Now, this is the interesting thing. This is actually, I'm not sure about the US. They don't, white America's not keen on it there, but it's effectively banned in the UK. Banned. I mean, as soon as you say something's banned, for me, I want to look at it even more. So the first thing, race is socially constructed. Now, perhaps the easiest way of explaining it to you is that, think about trans. Supporters of trans people say gender is constructed, therefore a man can become a woman and a woman could become a man. Now, in most circumstances, I sit on the fence on this one, but I don't think there's anything dramatically controversial about the idea that race is socially constructed. For example, some of you may know that I was so excited that I got my DNA back, and I've got apparently North African and Nigerian DNA in my heritage. Who would have known? That's the point, right? We decide on, just on looks, who we are. Racism is normalised. I think we could all agree on that, right? In the UK, perfectly law-abiding young black men get stopped and searched on a regular basis just because they're black. I don't think that's controversial at all. Interest convergence just means white people will change things for the better if it suits them. For example, they gave civil rights movement their rights because they were aware that if they didn't, it may there may be uprising, there may be violence. So it was their interests to give in. All right. Differential racialism means something along the lines of, there are different races in the US and even in the UK, and they might say, well, look, those Chinese people are doing very well at university. Why aren't you? That's effectively what it is. Okay. Intersectionality is exactly what I've told you, and I don't know what the Voices of Colour thesis is. Okay, if someone wants to look that up, you can. So here's intersectionality. It could be any number of things. It's the obvious ones are being black and a woman. That it came out of the black feminist movement of the 1970s, but it can be anything. It can be qualified and unqualified, literate and unliterate, attractive and unattractive. In fact, that's a really important one, believe it or not. Beautiful people get better jobs and get often chose for jobs more often than unattractive people. So it's a whole spectrum. Most importantly, black and female, but also all the others as well. Okay. And so finally, I want to quickly look at black language or African American vernacular English, ARVE, or what it used to be called Ebonics. So let me just use the words of Jamila Lyscott. So she said in this kind of TED Talk spoken word performance, these words are spoken by someone who is simply fed up with the Eurocentric ideals of this season. And the reason I speak a composite version of your language is because mine was raped away along with my history. I speak broken English so the profusing gases can remind us that our current state is not a mystery. Okay? So in her book Linguistic Justice, April Baker Bell talks about dismantling what she calls the anti-black linguistic racism and white linguistic supremacy. Now this relates to us. As an English teacher, if we look at the exam board's mark schemes, it will say I have essentially a responsibility to teach you standard English. Standard English is exactly what April is pushing against. Now, obviously, as most of you speak English as a second language, I do think that it is important, but I also think it's important to realise how everything's connected and everything has a reason, and we should question everything. And I agree with April that we should at least start dismantling some aspects of anti-black linguistic racism. Finally, so I'm going to look at one poem, Let America Be America by Langston Hughes. I was going to look at Invisible Man and Their Eyes Were Watching God, but this video took way longer than I thought it would, so I'm going to keep the modelled answer much shorter. Okay. So, very quickly, Langston Hughes. I did a quick search on the three. So there were two different ways that academics release their research to the public or to other students, effectively. The first thing is through text, through books, textbooks and books. The second is through journals. And these are like short papers that get uploaded onto, obviously, websites where anyone can read. Now, if we look at Oxford, I have to put my glasses on. Oxford Academic, there was 1,540 separate texts on Langston Hughes for them. On Project Muse, which is a slightly more modern version, 2,169. And for JSTOR, which is one of the most famous ones and the most established, 13,495 discrete journal papers on Langston Hughes alone. They will come from lots of different directions. They will come from him being part of the Harlem Renaissance, the fact he might be gay, his actual work, and his poetry and his fiction. And that's just one African American writer in the world. There are hundreds of thousands of different writers of different colours, of different nationalities, from the very famous like Shakespeare to the completely obscure and writers that are no longer in print. The amount of knowledge and the amount of creative output is just awe-inspiring. Okay? So, finally, my provocation. These are two of my ex-girlfriends. Bernie on the left, I've asked her permission. I'm still in contact with her, and she said it's absolutely fine. Okay. The other lady I couldn't get in contact with, so obviously I've blurred her out. When you, I'm not talking about sex here, but love. When you look in someone's eyes, you know that look when you're in love with someone, that breaks down the ego, then you're looking at each other through each other's eyes, in each other's eyes. Any idea of difference and the other and race sort of melt away, and only love is left. So I'm going to provoke you. Love without fear. See you next week.